Today is Bhagat Singh's Martyrdom Day, and we would like to remember him in these very dark times. These are dark times not only because of the coronavirus, but because of the communal virus which has spread unbelievably across the country. We are in a situation where the tallest of Indian political leadership at the highest, holding the highest offices, openly talk about a Hindu Rashtra that is a majoritarian religious state who demonize the minorities, who praise and even worship communal ideologues who had a hand in the murder of the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi. In such a situation where these very forces who do all these things try to appropriate Bhagat Singh and use him as try to use them as their mascot and use him often to denigrate and bring down the image of Mahatma Gandhi. In such a situation, I felt that it would be useful to share some views that I have on Bhagat Singh and his relevance today. Bhagat Singh, as I understand, quintessentially represented the best values that are incorporated in what has been loosely called a term that was used by Rabindranath Tagore, what was loosely called the idea of India. He represented these values which emerged from our national liberation struggle, a nearly 100-year-old national liberation struggle in which people of a wide spectrum of political views participated. They all shared this common vision, from communists to socialists to, excuse me, to Gandhians, to left nationalists, Nehruvians, liberals. There's this huge spectrum. But they had all one thing in common, that they believed in these some of the uh, basic concepts on which the idea of India was built. And Bhagat Singh, as I said, was one of the bravest, one of the fiercest, if you like, examples of upholding these ideas. Now, what are these ideas that we are talking about? Of course, the most important idea that emerged from the freedom struggle was the idea of independence, sovereignty, that we shall be a free people, not be dominated. And as one doesn't have to belabor this point, that Bhagat Singh was right in front in opposing colonial rule and fighting for India's freedom. That is not something that what has to be argued. But the other ideas that constituted the idea of India were the future India would be a democratic, inclusive, secular India. Democracy and secularism were used as coterminous terms. Secular democracy. You cannot be, the assumption was that you cannot be democratic unless you are secular. And you cannot be secular unless you are democratic. How can you be democratic if you suppress a part of your people? How can you be secular if you do not give democratic rights to every citizen, irrespective of their religion, caste, community, or whatever? And Bhagat Singh, again, was a fierce believer in secularism. It is well known that the organization that he set up, one of the organizations, the Naujawan Bharat Sabha, had it in its constitution that unless you believed in secularism or you opposed communalism, the definition of secularism in India also meant that you had to be opposed to be communalism. That unless you did that, you could not be part of this. Another very interesting example, often cited, of Bhagat Singh's deep commitment to secularism was, as you know, that he emerged as a leader in Punjab, and in his youth, one of the tallest leaders of Punjab was Lala Lajpat Rai. And it is also known that Lala Lajpat Rai began to demonstrate certain communal tendencies in his thinking. And Bhagat Singh, who deeply revered him, on the one hand, and as you know, that he lost his life in order to avenge the death of Lala Lajpat Rai in a police lathi charge. The attempt to murder the police officer responsible for the lathi charge which led to Lala Lajpat Rai's death is what eventually led Bhagat Singh to the gallows. So this is the man he respected deeply. But once he noticed that there were elements of communalism emerging in Lala Lajpat Rai, he produced a pamphlet where the pamphlet has a photograph of Lala Lajpat Rai, nothing written below it. But next is a poem by Robert Browning called The Lost Leader. So he could not bring himself up to actually saying something critical to him directly, but he made it very clear that this is how he felt about a person who he had revered so much, moving away from the sturdy path of secularism. Bhagat Singh also made a breakthrough in, like Jawaharlal Nehru, in seeing the connection between communalism and communalism. We often tend to forget that, especially these days, when the communalists tries to present themselves as nationalist, Hindu nationalists. They claim the platform of nationalism, completely forgetting that communalists in the colonial period were in fact the instruments in the hand of the colonial state to fight Indian nationalism. So they stood exactly opposed to the nationalist platform, and yet they claim the nationalist platform. So this link that communalism and colonialism are deeply linked is something that must be remembered. In fact, one can argue that the longest legacy of colonialism globally has been that it has left behind a divided people. The longest legacy has not been the economic deprivation. Of course, countries like India were devastated. Over 200 years of colonial rule. India, China, whole Korea, Indonesia, whole parts of the world were colonized and their economies decimated. But they've been able to recover. Political and economic independence has slowly happened in these countries. But what you find remaining in large parts of the world is the division in the people, whether it is Ireland or whether it is in Africa or whether it is in India. It is the division that has occurred within those people on the basis of either race or caste or religion, whether you're a Catholic or a Protestant, and these divisions have remained to date, decades after colonialism has gone. And Bhagat Singh was very conscious of this, that communalism needs to be fought frontally. Otherwise, it is not something that is going to die out. The third idea in the idea of India, which is critical to the idea of India, on which again I emphasize there was a unanimity from the left to the right among the nationalists. No unanimity among the anti nationalists, but among all the nationalists across the spectrum, there was unanimity, was that the future India would have a pro poor orientation. The unanimity was not on socialism, though socialism emerged as a very powerful strand, but the unanimity was on a pro poor orientation, right from the early nationalist days. Like Dadabhai Naroji writes his first book called Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. So from Naroji to R.C. Dutt to Gokhale to Ranade to Gandhiji to Nehru, then again, of course, the socialists and the communists, this issue of the poor was very central. And Bhagat Singh, in his very brief, short life, he died at the age of 23, made this transition very quickly from pure nationalism, that is, just opposition to British rule. His ideology emerged as one which was going to give the substance to Indian nationalism somewhat differently. That is, it is not only the overthrow of British rule, but it is also going to be an overthrow of a social order which was uh, which was suppressive of sections of the people. That is, it was to be revolutionary nationalism, a nationalism which will change the social order. And for that, Bhagat Singh makes a rapid progress. In fact, in a very brief period of his life, as I said, from the age of about 15 to 23, he, he traverses almost the entire spectrum of the Indian national movement. He starts off in the Gandhian national movement, then goes into the revolutionary activity, the individual terror activity that was appropriated by groups of people in various parts of the country. That is the use of violence, to a recognition that individual acts of heroism are not going to be the answer. That you require mass movements. And this is what brings him towards Marxism. Before, by the time he is in his 20s, he is deeply influenced by Marxism. And in his writings from about 1926 till his death, you see that imprint of his understanding that the answers lay in Marxism. He also traverses the ground in what forms of struggle are to be used. As I said, whereas he was in his very early years, he was influenced by the individual heroic violent actions that was argued by the early revolutionaries. Over time, he comes to the conclusion, and this is very important, especially since Bhagat Singh is so easily and so commonly pitted against Gandhi. He comes to the conclusion saying that violence can be used or force can be used only as only when it is of utmost necessity. When it becomes a necessary evil. It's not something that you wish to do. There is no romanticizing of violence. It is, he says, to be used only when, to use his exact words, force is justifiable when resorted to as a matter of terrible necessity, he says. More important, he says, that non-violence as a policy was indispensable for all mass movements. Now, this is a big breakthrough in a young man at that time who moves away from Gandhian politics into Marxist politics, but at the same time understands the essence of the Gandhian strategy, that you cannot build a mass movement which is based on violence. And therefore he moves away and in fact comes closer to the Gandhian understanding that in order to build a mass movement, what kind of strategies are necessary. Now this is extremely useful because as I said, that Bhagat Singh is used so often to denigrate Gandhi. It is not. It is forgotten that they were coming. Their views were converging on a number of issues. The socialist influence in Bhagat Singh is, of course, seen in his being instrumental, not only he, Chandrasekhar Azad and others, changing the name of the Hindustan Republican Army to the Hindustan Socialist Republican Army. Now, this is interesting. Those who now are trying to claim Bhagat Singh are the ones who are on a virtual daily basis raising the issue that why has the word socialism and why has the word secularism been inserted into the constitution? As if these are two bad things. So people who are opposed to two of Bhagat Singh's most dear ideas, socialism and secularism, are the ones who are now trying to appropriate Bhagat Singh. And this must be understood. We mustn't let the opponents of the idea of India, the opponents of Bhagat Singh's deep convictions, run away with the legacy of Bhagat Singh. The another manner in which Bhagat Singh represented the tradition of the Indian freedom struggle was this amazing ability to bravely face the consequences of their action. And this is true from the early nationalist days, from early nationalists, the extremists, Gandhi. They would commit offenses. For example, Tilak would continue to write revolutionary or anti-imperialist writings in his journals and would get arrested. And they would not ask for forgiveness. They would, as Gandhiji famously said, ask for punishment. Yes, I am going to break the law. You punish me for breaking the law. That is, they would own up to their acts. Quite contrary to those forces who were not part of the national liberation struggle, who did the opposite, who would commit an act and then not own up to it, would ask for forgiveness. If you want to think of a contrast to Bhagat Singh, Savarkar would be a very good example. He is imprisoned by the British for his involvement in early revolutionary activity, and within a short period, he begins to apologize. He writes letters of apology which would put you to shame. They are so demeaning and there has so much begging in those letters of the British authorities that please let me go. That in your great magnanimous, magnanimity, you must let the prodigal son return kind of language. And he gets himself released. He asks for a pension, and the British, he actually accepts a pension from the British while British rule is in a place in India. Bhagat Singh was the exact opposite. As you know, after the killing of the police officer Saunders, Bhagat Singh was one of the group of revolutionaries which committed that act. He went into hiding. He was able to escape and was in hiding. But shortly after that, he returns into politics and he takes part in this bomb case in the assembly where a harmless bomb is thrown in the assembly to quote them, to make the deaf hear. The idea was not to kill anybody because by now he has given up the notion of violence, but to create a noise, get arrested, so that then he could use the courts to propagate the nationalist idea. And that is exactly what happens. But look at the courage of the man it was obviously known to everybody that if he gets arrested, and since he's already implicated in the Saunders murder case, the chances of his being hanged were very, very high. In other words, he virtually walks into the gallows rather than ask for forgiveness and uh, live off the pension of the colonial rulers. It has often been ignored, it has been mentioned earlier, that Bhagat Singh was also a very great intellectual. He was a voracious reader, and in fact, there is a famous statement by him that the sword of revolution is sharpened at the whetstone of thought. So, revolution is not just emotion and uh, and sort of acts of courage, but it is also an act of reasoning and thought. Hmm? And therefore, he himself read a lot and he asked others to read. And as a result, produced made himself certain big breakthroughs and also made major arguments in favor of reason and rationality. He was convinced, he was a very convinced fighter against obscurantism, against unreason. As you know, in these dark days, people who do that are often killed, like Kalburgi and several others in recent years, the Bolkar. But he stood for this, what Nehru called uh, the modern scientific temper in a very big way. So when we remember Bhagat Singh, we should also remember his basic values, his scientific temper, in days like these, where again the leadership of our country, rather than leading ordinary people out of obscurantism into reason, which is what our national movement did for 100 years, are doing exactly the opposite. Bringing our people back, taking them centuries back into unreason, into mythologies. Again, the tallest of our leaders talking about plastic surgery being practiced in ancient India. Otherwise, how would Ganesha get his elephant head on a human body and things like that? I mean, this is just one example. But so much unreason that you see every day, having Gomutra parties to fight the coronavirus, covering yourself with gobar, and so on and so forth. And in these times, none of this argued scientifically. Uh, in these times, we must remember Bhagat Singh. I'd like to end by just saying that in remembering Bhagat Singh, we need to remember, we need to revive the spirit of struggle in times where questioning, where asking questions itself comes with a price, where young people, like students of JNU, have been arrested, charge sheeted, with mind you, the same sections, that is sedition, which were put against Bhagat Singh and Gandhiji. So in these times, let us remember Bhagat Singh and people like him, where to to get the courage that is necessary to fight this pestilence that has overcome our country. And as I said, the pestilence I'm talking about is the communal pestilence. Let's draw courage from him. Let's draw reason from him. Let's draw, let's make the word secular and socialist not dirty words. These were words used, concepts used by the best amongst our people, people like Bhagat Singh and Jawaharlal Nehru and Jay Prakash Narayan. I could mention you dozens of people who were committed to these ideas, certainly to the idea of secularism. Even the so called right wing leaders, though they were hardly right, people like Sardar Patel and Rajaji, etc., were deeply secular. So let us remember Bhagat Singh on his anniversary, on his martyrdom day, for the contribution he has made to the country and what we can draw out of it. What are the directions we need to move to keep alive the idea of India? Thank you.